She thought she was just exhausted, dehydrated, maybe overworked. But what happened next would tear her away from reality and drop her at the edge of life itself. Her body began to shut down, one limb at a time, until she became nothing more than a head and a heart, trapped under a tree in the desert. That's when the air shifted. A voice emerged, and a strange, silent movie began to play. It wasn't fiction, it was her own life. Every painful truth, every lie she told herself, every moment she refused to feel. And then, a question that would shatter her. What were you thinking right then? What she saw after that changed everything. Love wasn't what she thought. Death wasn't what she feared. And the one thing we all chase? It might not matter at all. What if we've misunderstood the very point of being alive? She came back with a message, and it's one you need to hear, before it's too late. I never thought something like this could happen to me. I was always the kind of person who believed in science, in evidence, in facts. As a behavioral therapist for children on the spectrum, my days were filled with logic, careful observation, and practical solutions. I'd always left the mystical to others, those who needed comfort in things they couldn't see. But nothing in my professional training could have prepared me for what I was about to experience. It started during a retreat I had signed up for on a whim. I had been burned out, emotionally exhausted after a rough year of overwork and personal loss. The retreat promised renewal of the self, and at that point, I needed that more than anything. So I packed my things and drove 6 hours into the desert, ready to face my fears. Or so I thought. The retreat was intense from the start. Long hikes under the punishing sun, ice-cold water plunges at dawn, hours of silence, and unexpected emotional confrontations. The facilitators seemed to know exactly how to push each person to their limit. By the third day, we were sleeping maybe 4 hours a night, eating high-protein meals, drinking gallons of water, and constantly being exposed to physical and psychological stressors. The idea was to break through your perceived limits and reconnect with something deeper. But by the 6th day, my body started to shut down. That afternoon was the turning point. I remember lying inside my tent, which had turned into an oven under the afternoon heat. I felt off, more than just tired. My muscles ached in a strange, disconnected way, and my hands were trembling, despite having just eaten and hydrated. I chalked it up to exhaustion, but as the hours passed, things got worse. My limbs began to go numb one by one, starting with my toes, then moving upward. My breath became shallow, and my vision blurred into kaleidoscopic patches. At some point, I tried to stand and collapsed. That's when the fear truly kicked in. One of the other attendees, a kind woman named Nina, who I'd shared most of my meals with, found me and held my hand while someone ran for help. But there was no cell service, no medical staff, just us, in the middle of nowhere. She kept whispering, "Stay with me," but I couldn't. My mind was already slipping away. First came the silence. It wasn't the absence of sound. It was the silence of leaving the world, the silence of crossing a threshold. Then something extraordinary began. A sensation, like warm air, started rising through the top of my head. It was subtle at first, but it grew, and with it came the feeling that I was no longer entirely in my body. I hovered, not above myself like I'd heard in cliché stories, but somewhere between this reality and something else, something unspeakably vast. That's when the visions began. It was as if a movie screen had unfurled before me, showing vivid scenes from my life, not big dramatic moments, but the subtle, often forgotten interactions. I saw myself at 24, snapping at my father in a parking lot. I saw the way my shoulders tightened when a coworker tried to compliment me. I saw the exact moment I told my younger sister I didn't have time to talk, even though she'd clearly needed me. And I wasn't just seeing these moments. I was inside them again, feeling everything I had felt then, and also everything the other person had felt. Each time a scene paused, a voice, calm, male, and patient, would gently ask me, "What were you thinking at that moment?" And each time I answered, truthfully or not, I felt the voice responding, not with judgment, but with clarity. If I lied, the voice would pause, then ask, "Are you sure?" And somehow, I always knew it already knew the answer. That simple phrase dismantled my defenses. "Are you sure?" It wasn't a test. It was an invitation to see myself clearly, maybe for the first time. These life reviews went on endlessly, or at least outside of time. I wasn't aware of how long I'd been gone or whether I was even breathing anymore. There was no sense of panic now, just an unfolding, a deep excavation of truth. I began to realize how disconnected I'd been from others, from myself. All of the missed chances to connect, to be kind, to listen. And just when I thought it would never end, the screen went dark. When the screen went black, I felt suspended in something I can only describe as stillness. Not emptiness, not nothingness, but a kind of sacred pause. It was like the world, both outer and inner, had taken a breath and was holding it. And then, out of that sacred silence, the voice returned. But this time, it said something different. Something that changed everything. Do you want to stay or go? I knew immediately what that meant. And yet, the meaning was so profound, I couldn't comprehend it all at once. I wasn't being told what to do. I wasn't being pushed toward the light or pulled back into the world. I was being invited, offered a choice with full respect for my free will. But to make that choice, I had to understand the true weight of both options. The moment the question landed in me, the space around me shifted. I suddenly felt what I can only describe as love. Not human love, not romantic or maternal or even spiritual in the way we use the word down here. This was different. This was the atmosphere itself. The very space I was in was made of love. Not metaphorically. It was love. The molecules, the air, the substance around me. It pulsed with a quality so radiant and total that all fear vanished. Every doubt, every regret, every small self-judgment I'd ever held just dissolved into it. There was no place for fear in a space like that. I remember thinking, if people knew this is what awaits them, they'd never be afraid of death again. Not the moment of death anyway. Not what comes after. Dying might still be messy, scary, painful, but death itself, the other side, it was more welcoming than anything I'd ever felt in life. But even so, I hesitated, because I remembered my body. I remembered the taste of fresh strawberries, the way sunlight dances across a page when you're reading near a window. I remembered the weight of a child's head on my shoulder after a tantrum, the way my dog's paws sound on hardwood floors, the smell of rain on asphalt, the feeling of my mother's sweater when I hugged her goodbye that last time. And I thought, how can I leave all of that? So I asked the voice, or the presence, or whatever was holding me, what about my work? My unfinished writing, the therapy program I've been developing, the children I work with every week. What about them? And the answer came gently, almost amused. That's not what matters most. That stunned me. All my life I'd poured myself into my goals, my career, the things I was building. But the voice continued, what matters are your connections. If your work opens hearts, bridges divides, helps people feel less alone, then yes, it matters. But the work itself, it's only the tool. The point is always the connection. I sat with that. Or rather, I existed within it, because there was no sitting in this place. I existed in understanding. And slowly, with reverence and gratitude for the beauty of that realm, I said, I want to go back. There was no explosion of light, no dramatic pull, only a soft return. A quiet undoing of the journey out. That warm air that had once lifted me now gently folded itself back into my chest. I felt the faintest tingling in my fingers, my toes, my lips. And when I opened my eyes, I was looking at the tree above me, the setting sun behind its branches, and Nina's tearful face just a few feet away, whispering my name. I was back, changed forever. Before we move on to the rest of the story, if you're still here, I want to thank you. And I'd love to ask something, not as a channel, not as a brand, but as a fellow traveler. If this story has touched something in you, made you feel, remember, or question something, please subscribe so you don't miss what's coming next. But more than that, could you leave a comment? Not a thumbs up, not a cool story. Tell me your truth. What part of this reminded you of someone you miss? What did it make you wonder about life? Let's make the comments a place of honesty, of connection. Because as you've just heard, that's what really matters. Coming back into my body wasn't like waking up from a nap. It was like slipping into a suit that was 2 sizes too small. Everything felt heavy, slow, and slightly alien. My limbs tingled as they came back to life, but my heart felt like it had been cracked open, and I wasn't sure if it would ever close again. The golden light of the sunset wrapped around everything like a warm shawl, and for a long moment, I just lay there, breathing in the simple, breathtaking privilege of being alive. I remember the sound of the wind in the grass, the low hum of insects somewhere nearby, and Nina's voice trembling with relief as she kept asking if I was okay. I didn't have the words yet, not even close. I nodded, barely. Tears slipped down my face, not from pain, but from awe. That tree, that sky, that single buzzing bee landing on a flower next to my hand. It all felt like more than before. More alive, more sacred, more beautiful than anything I had ever let myself notice. We didn't go back to the retreat center that evening. Nina helped me to the edge of the camp and we just sat there, wrapped in a blanket, her arm around my shoulders while I sipped water slowly, carefully this time. She didn't ask for details. I think she knew I wasn't ready to speak. Instead, we watched the sun dip below the horizon together, and I knew, without a doubt, that I would never be the same again. The next few days were disorienting. Physically, I recovered quickly, but emotionally, spiritually, I was raw, exposed. Like every filter I used to have between me and the world had been stripped away. I remember walking into a grocery store the day after getting home and being completely overwhelmed. The colors, the sounds, the smells, they were too much, and yet I couldn't look away. Every stranger I passed, I saw as if for the first time. Their eyes, their posture, their pain. I wondered if they knew. I wondered if anyone knew what I now knew. And then came the memories. Not of this life, but of that place. The other side. I would be brushing my teeth or folding laundry, and suddenly, a sensation would hit me. A flash of that molecular love, that deep understanding, that oneness. And I would stop whatever I was doing and just stand there, breathing, tears in my eyes, trying not to forget. But I knew I couldn't keep it all to myself, because before I had returned, the voice had asked something of me. Not a demand, not a command, but a request, a sacred promise. I was to reach out to 4 people. Each one had played a different role in my life, and for reasons I didn't fully understand, I was to tell them what they had meant to me. Not just, I love you. No, deeper than that. I was to tell them what their presence had done in my life, what they had awakened, what I had learned through them, what part of myself had been changed because of knowing them. The first call I made was to an old friend I hadn't spoken to in nearly a decade. We'd had a falling out over something stupid, as so many friendships do. I'd moved on, or so I'd told myself. But when I heard her voice on the other end of the line, something inside me cracked. I didn't apologize for the fight. I didn't even bring it up. I simply said, I don't know if this is strange, but I wanted to thank you for being part of my life when you were, for teaching me patience, and for making me laugh when I really, really needed to. There was silence on the line. And then, softly, she said, I really needed to hear that today. I hung up the phone, hands shaking, and sat quietly for a long time. 1 down, 3 to go. The second person on that list was someone I hadn't spoken to in years, my former supervisor at the clinic where I began my career. Our relationship had always been marked by tension, quiet disagreements, philosophical clashes over therapeutic methods, and eventually, a mutual distancing. I hesitated. My ego still wanted to protect me, to convince me that reaching out wasn't necessary, but that voice still whispered in the back of my mind, you promised. So I wrote a letter, not because it was easier, but because I needed to find the right words, the true ones. I wrote about how, without realizing it, he had planted seeds in me, how his rigidity had forced me to seek out compassion, how his high standards had taught me to be more ethical, more precise, more human in my practice. And I ended the letter with something simple but burning with truth. Without your challenges, I wouldn't have become the therapist I am today. I dropped it in the mailbox with trembling hands. I didn't need a response. That moment was about completing something sacred, honoring the invisible thread that had tied us together, acknowledging the role he had played in my journey. The third person was the hardest. My sister. Still alive, but distant. We had grown up close, but over the years, the unspoken hurts had built a wall neither of us seemed willing to climb. Pride, silence, old wounds. The voice had told me I had to see her, with my own eyes, within that same week. My chest tightened just thinking about it. I called her on a cold Wednesday morning. When she picked up, her voice was surprised, cautious. I was direct. I told her I needed to see her. It wasn't about illness or emergency. It was just something that needed to be done. We met at a small, half-empty cafe that somehow felt just right. I sat across from her and, for the first time in years, really looked at her. I saw the new lines on her face, the tiredness in her eyes, the pain that maybe had never left since our father died. And I spoke, with my heart wide open. I told her I missed her, that even in our differences I had always admired her strength, that she had taught me more about resilience than any textbook ever could. She didn't respond for a while. Then she took my hand across the table and cried, quietly. In that moment, the wall between us fell without a sound. The last name on the list was a man named Lucas, an old college friend I hadn't spoken to in years. There had been no conflict between us, just the natural drift of time. I didn't understand why he was on the list, but the voice had been clear. So I called. He answered with his usual lightness, joking that I must need something important if I was calling out of the blue. I didn't need a grand explanation. I just said, let's talk more, even if it's just 5 minutes a week. I'd really like that. He agreed without hesitation. And starting that week, every Friday afternoon, we had small phone conversations, sometimes trivial, sometimes deep, but always human, always present. With all 4 connections reawakened, something inside me settled. It was as if the threads that had kept me tethered to that other realm had finally loosened, one by one. I had fulfilled the agreement. I had honored the ties. And in that new space of freedom, I began to understand the real reason I had been sent back. It wasn't to finish my projects. It wasn't to shine or prove anything to the world. It was to love better, to see more clearly, to live more fully than I ever had before. Living after that experience wasn't like coming back to the same life. Everything looked familiar, yes, but it was as if the lens had changed. I was no longer moving through my days out of habit or obligation. I was observing everything, everyone, with an intensity I hadn't known was possible. The man sweeping the sidewalk outside my building, the woman in line behind me at the post office, humming quietly to herself. Each one seemed radiant, holy in a way I never noticed before. I couldn't unsee it, and it wasn't just people. It was everything. The way light poured through my kitchen window in the morning, how it made tiny prisms on the floor, the way my dog tilted her head when I said her name, the quiet rustle of the leaves when I took my afternoon walks. I didn't rush anymore. I let things unfold. I paid attention. And in that attention, I found reverence. But this heightened awareness wasn't always easy. Along with the beauty came an overwhelming sensitivity. I could no longer tolerate shallow conversations, small lies, or the noise of meaningless distraction. Crowded rooms drained me. Social media made my chest tighten. I found myself craving silence the way I once craved coffee or sugar, desperately and constantly. I had always considered myself emotionally resilient. Years in therapy and training had made me good at holding space for others. But now I felt everything. And I mean everything. Someone's sadness in their posture, the tightness in a cashier's smile, the grief hiding behind a friend's joke. It was like the walls I had built to filter out all that pain had melted, and I was left wide open. At first, I tried to rebuild those walls, tried to toughen up, go back to the functional version of me. But every time I did, I could feel something within me shrink, dim, as if the cost of pretending was too high now. So I chose instead to feel it all, to let myself weep when I needed, to sit in the presence of someone's sorrow without trying to fix it, to simply be, fully, vulnerably, unapologetically human. One day, a mother came to my office with her young son. He had just been diagnosed with autism, and she was unraveling. I had seen many parents like her over the years, tired, scared, ashamed of their fear. But this time, I didn't go straight to strategies and tools. I sat down across from her, met her eyes, and said, "This is hard, and you're doing beautifully." She broke. Not because I gave her hope, but because for the first time, someone had seen her. That became my new compass. To really see people. Not as patients or parents or roles they played, but as souls navigating a world that often forgot its own softness. I didn't need to fix them. I just needed to meet them where they were. And in that meeting, something always shifted. Sometimes I wondered why I had been chosen for that experience. Why not someone else? What made me worthy of such a glimpse into the beyond? But slowly, the question faded. It wasn't about worthiness. It was about readiness, about alignment, about having ears willing to listen and a heart willing to change. Because the truth is, I hadn't been chosen. I had been invited, and I said yes. For a long time, I kept my experience quiet, not because I was ashamed, but because I didn't know how to speak of it. How do you put into words something that unfolded outside do tempo e do corpo? Como traduzir um espaço onde o ar é feito de amor e as perguntas dissolvem antes mesmo de serem feitas? I tried once, a few months after my return. It was during a quiet dinner with two close friends. They were catching up on their lives, talking about work, relationships, a vacation one of them had planned. And then there was a lull, that soft opening in a conversation where something deeper wants to slip through. One of them looked at me and said, "You've been so different lately. Are you okay?" And I knew that was my moment. My hands trembled around my glass. I took a breath, and I told them. I told them I had died, or come so close that I no longer knew the difference. I told them about the visions, the voice, the invitation to return. I told them about the 4 people I was asked to reconnect with, and how each moment had changed something inside me. I told them I was no longer afraid of dying, but that I had become intensely aware of living. There was a long pause when I finished. One of them nodded slowly, eyes misty. The other seemed uncomfortable, shifting in her seat. And I understood both reactions, because even saying it out loud, a part of me doubted myself. Had I imagined it? Had I hallucinated in the heat, in the dehydration, in the collapse of my body? But deep down, I knew. That place was more real than this one. It was not a dream. It was not delusion. It was memory, clear, vivid, sacred. After that, I started writing. Not for anyone else at first, just to empty my chest. Page after page spilled out of me in the early mornings before the world woke up. I wrote about the love on the other side, about the moments of silence that carried more meaning than any words, about the way truth feels in your body when it's finally spoken. Eventually, I was invited to speak about it in a local group, just a dozen people gathered in a quiet room with folding chairs and open hearts. I was terrified, not of being judged, but of not being believed. But when I finished telling my story, no one questioned it. No one rolled their eyes or dismissed it. Instead, they leaned forward. They cried. They shared their stories, of moments they couldn't explain, of near misses, of dreams that felt more like memories. And I realized then that I was not alone, that maybe none of us are. We just don't always have the language for the sacred. It was never about convincing anyone. It still isn't. It's about opening a window just wide enough for someone else to breathe through. It's about offering a hand in the dark and saying, "I've been somewhere strange, and I came back with something tender to give." Since then, I've shared my story in small circles, in whispered conversations, and eventually, in larger rooms. Each time, I do it with the same reverence as I did that first night, because this story isn't just mine. It belongs to anyone who's ever wondered if there's more. Anyone who's ever felt that ache in the chest, that pull towards something they can't quite name. And if my words can be a bridge, just a small one, then I'll keep telling it, even if my voice shakes. The most surprising part of coming back wasn't the visions, the memories, or even the emotional unraveling. It was how deeply I began to cherish the ordinary. Not just appreciate it, but reverence it. Before, I moved through life on autopilot. Morning routine, clients, phone calls, errands, emails. All necessary, all fine. But after the experience, the world became enchanted. The steam rising from a mug of tea, the way rain sounds against the window during a slow afternoon, the texture of a blanket when I pull it to my chin at night. I began to feel a quiet holiness in everything. Not because anything had changed out there, but because everything had changed in here. I remember standing at the sink one morning, washing dishes. The sunlight was pouring in, hitting the soap bubbles just right, and I started crying. Not because I was sad, because I was grateful. That moment, my hands in warm water, a plate in front of me, birdsong outside the window, that was it. That was life, not the promotions, not the milestones, but this. And yet, even in all that softness, there was grief too. Because once you've seen the other side, part of you stays there. Not in a painful way, not in a longing for death, but in a constant awareness of the fragility of this place, how temporary it all is, how quickly things change. I would look at people, my clients, strangers, even children, and think, you don't know how holy you are, how temporary this moment is, how loved you already are without doing anything at all. And that broke my heart in the most beautiful way. It made me want to be gentler. With others, yes, but also with myself. I stopped speaking to myself in harsh tones. I let go of the perfectionism that had gripped me for so long. I no longer needed to prove I was good, or strong or capable. I just needed to be present and let my presence be enough. One of the most transformative realizations I carried back was this: we are always communicating with the other side. We just don't realize it. Every time we show love or tell the truth or act with compassion, we send ripples outward beyond what we can see. And in the same way, the other side is constantly whispering to us. Through dreams, through sudden clarity, through the pull in your gut that says, call your mother today. We don't need a near-death experience to hear it. We just need to quiet the noise long enough to listen. I began to trust those whispers. I no longer needed evidence to believe in what I felt. If something told me to turn left instead of right, I turned. If someone came to mind out of nowhere, I reached out. If I felt like sitting under a tree for no reason, I sat. And always, something opened because of it. A new connection, a moment of peace, a memory I didn't know I needed to remember. Life began to feel like a conversation, one that didn't require words, one that moved through stillness and symbols, through presence and pause. People would ask me, how can I feel closer to the other side without going through what you did? And my answer is always this: pay attention. To the space between your thoughts, to the silence after someone says something real, to the feeling that comes when you finally tell the truth, to the tug in your chest when something feels meaningful, even if you don't know why. The divine is subtle, but it's always there. Always. One of the most lasting effects of the experience was how it rewired the way I related to people. Before, I was polite, supportive, even warm, but always with a certain distance. There was a mask, a script, a way I believed I had to be in order to be liked, accepted, respected. But after returning from the edge of death, the mask didn't fit anymore. It was too heavy, too dishonest. I began to speak more slowly, more deliberately. I looked people in the eyes longer than was socially comfortable. I listened not just to their words, but to the energy behind them. And what I discovered is this: most people are desperate to be seen. Not fixed, not entertained, just seen. In their confusion, in their hope, in their ordinary, aching humanity. There was a moment, just a few weeks after I came back, when I sat across from a teenage girl I'd been working with for nearly a year. She'd come to me for anxiety and self-harm. Progress had been slow. We had built trust, but the wall around her heart was thick. That day, something was different. She walked in, sat down, and didn't speak. Just stared at the floor, arms crossed. I felt the old instinct rise, the urge to say something helpful, to fill the silence, to guide her toward breakthrough. But I resisted. Instead, I leaned forward slightly and said, "You don't have to talk if you don't want to. I'll just sit here with you." She didn't respond, but her eyes lifted for a brief second, and I saw it. That flicker, that sigh beneath the surface, that tiny piece of her saying, "Thank you." We sat in silence for 38 minutes. It was one of the most powerful sessions I've ever had. When the session ended, she looked at me and whispered, "No one's ever just sat with me like that." That's when I understood something the voice had hinted at, but I hadn't fully grasped until then. We heal not by doing, but by being. Presence is the medicine. Truth is the mirror. Love is the alchemy. And yet, even knowing this, I often found myself forgetting. Life has a way of pulling you back into its rhythms. The dishes still pile up. The traffic still makes you late. Emails still demand responses. I am not floating through life on a cloud of enlightenment. I still get annoyed. I still forget to breathe. I still get lost in my head. But I always find my way back. Sometimes it takes a sunset, or a child's laughter, or an old song I used to sing with my father. Sometimes it's the quiet ache in my chest when I realize I haven't spoken to my sister in a few weeks. Sometimes it's just a stranger holding the door and smiling, and something in me stirs again. That stirring, it's the thread, the one that connects us back to the center, the one that never really breaks. People often ask if I fear death now, and I always tell them the same thing: not anymore. But what I do fear, deeply, is not living fully while I'm still here, wasting time on anger, or pride, or pretending to be something I'm not, missing moments because I'm too distracted, not telling people how I truly feel. That's the real death, the slow kind, the one we don't notice until it's already happened. So now, I tell the truth more often. I say I love you more freely. I ask deeper questions. I give longer hugs. I try not to leave anything important unsaid, because if I've learned anything, it's that love is the only thing that crosses over. There were nights, especially early on, when I would lie awake in bed, staring at the ceiling, asking myself the same question over and over. Why did I come back? Not in despair, not with regret, but with a kind of sacred curiosity, because part of me still remembered the pull of that other place, the love, the stillness, the completeness, and part of me ached for it. But what came each time I asked was never a voice, never a clear answer, just this quiet knowing that vibrated through my chest like an echo. You came back to love. Not the idea of love, not the performance of it, but the real thing. The raw, uncomfortable, holy act of showing up with your whole heart, even when it might break. That became my prayer, my practice, my compass. I began to revisit parts of my past I had left untouched. I reached out to a former client's mother whose child had passed years ago. I didn't know what to say. I just told her I still thought about him, that I remembered the way he used to hum when he drew, that his light had mattered. She wept. I wept. That was all. I took long walks with my father, the kind we hadn't shared since I was a teenager. We didn't talk about deep things. We just moved side by side through parks and along sidewalks, sometimes in silence. But one day, out of nowhere, he said, "You're different now, softer maybe." And I smiled, because he had noticed, without me explaining a thing. And I started telling people the little truths, the things we all hold back, like how beautiful their laugh is, or how I remember something kind they once did that they probably forgot, or how just their presence in the room makes things feel steadier. It felt awkward at first. We're not taught to speak like that. But each time I did, something shifted. Eyes welled. Hands reached out. Barriers fell. The world began to feel less like a battlefield, and more like a shared home. But the most important part? I started saying these things to myself too. I forgave myself for all the years I'd been hard, for all the times I chased perfection instead of peace. I forgave the girl who made mistakes, the woman who stayed too long in pain, the therapist who sometimes didn't have all the answers. I looked at her, me, and said, "You were doing the best you could," and it was enough. That forgiveness cracked something open, because on the other side, there is no scoreboard, no tally of your failures or your flaws. There is only the truth of your heart. And if I learned anything in those hours outside of time, it's that the heart is the only thing that matters. Not your resume, not your body, not the number of people who know your name, just your heart, its depth, its honesty, its willingness to stay open, even after everything. I came back to love. I came back to tell the truth. I came back because someone, somewhere, needed to hear a story that reminded them they were never really alone. And maybe that someone is you. Sometimes I wonder if I'll ever be able to explain fully what happened. Not because I don't have the words, but because the words will never be enough. How do you describe a moment when time unraveled? When love became oxygen? When you saw your life, not from the outside, but from within the soul of it? Maybe the point isn't to explain. Maybe the point is to live in a way that honors it. So I do. Quietly. Imperfectly. Every day. I still have deadlines. I still get distracted. I still feel the pull of this world, the noise, the expectations, the rush of days that vanish before I can catch my breath. But I carry something now. A thread. Invisible, but always there. It tugs at me when I start to forget. It brings me back when I get lost. It reminds me, you've been somewhere beyond all this, and you came back for a reason. That reason isn't always clear. Sometimes it's a conversation at the gas station. Sometimes it's sitting with a child who won't speak, but needs you to simply stay. Sometimes it's just a moment at dusk, watching the last light fade behind the trees, and knowing that your heartbeat is part of something ancient, something vast, something sacred. This story is not special because it's mine. It's special because it speaks to something universal. You may never have left your body. You may never have heard the voice, but I'd bet you felt it, in your own way. That brush of grace, that inexplicable moment of knowing, that dream you woke from with tears on your face, that gut feeling that turned out to be right, that sense, even in your worst pain, that something bigger was still holding you. So maybe you've already touched the edge too. And if any part of what I've shared today stirred something in your heart, some tenderness, some memory, some ache for what's real, then I'd like to ask you something. Would you consider subscribing to this channel? Not because numbers matter, but because connection does. Because if you're still here, reading this, it means your heart is open, and we need more of that in the world. And more than that, I'd love to hear your story. In the comments, tell me, have you ever felt something you couldn't explain? Have you ever had a moment that changed you forever? What did you learn? What did you feel? Even just one sentence, a memory, a question. Let's make this space a sacred circle where truth is welcome and love has room to breathe. We don't need to all agree. We just need to be real. Because at the end of it all, what we carry with us isn't what we owned, achieved, or posted online. It's how we made each other feel. And I hope, if nothing else, this story made you feel just a little more alive. Thank you for listening, and thank you for remembering with me.